Okay, good morning. I'm going to do something a little bit different this morning and take a look at the themes of identity, redeemability, and redemption in Sefer Bereishit and Sefer Shemot, which we will begin Bezrat Hashem this Shabbat. But we'll see how the ideas and themes are very relevant to many of the challenges that we face today in the modern state of Israel and in the diaspora. So as we'll examine together and explore in depth this morning, maintaining or preserving identity is a major theme in Sefer Bereishit and Sefer Shemot. And there's this great scene at the end of Sefer Bereishit in Parashat Vayechi that we read this past Shabbat, when Yaakov is about to bless the sons of Yosef, Menashe, and Ephraim. And the Torah there says, it's Perek Memchet, Pasuk Chet and Tet, Vayar Yisrael et bnei Yosef, Vayomer mi ele. It says that Yaakov sees the children of Yosef, Menashe, and Ephraim, and he asks, mi ele, who are they? What do you mean, mi'ele? Who are they? Right? So you could say, well, maybe he was already older, his eyesight was waning, but the Torah itself says, Vayar Yisrael, that he saw, suggesting that no, his sight was fine. Maybe it wasn't 20/20, but he saw them. In other words, if he has to ask who are they, because somehow his faculty of sight has diminished over time with age. So the Torah wouldn't say that he saw them. The Torah says explicitly he saw them. So what's with this question? Mi'ele, what's he asking? And if you say, well, maybe he never met them, maybe he didn't know who they were. Yaakov by then has been living for years and years in eretz Mitzrayim together with Yosef and his children. Certainly he knows who they are. Perhaps he's asking a deeper question. Mi'ele, who are they spiritually? I see two boys in front of me that are dressed in Egyptian clothing, that are speaking in Egyptian, a foreign tongue, that have taken on the trappings of Egyptian culture. Mi'ele, who are they spiritually? Now, according to Chazal, and this is cited by Rashi, Bikesh levarcham, Rashi writes, Yaakov wanted to bless them, v'nistalka shchina mimenu, but the shchina, the divine presence had been removed from him, because in the future, Yeravam and Achav, these wicked kings, would come from Ephraim, and Yehu and his children would come from Menashe. And the Mi'ele question is, how could such wicked kings come from these boys? Are they really fitting to be blessed? These descendants that certainly are not worthy of being blessed. So Chazal and Rashi are already sensitive to the fact that this question of Mi'ele is not just a technical question. Who are they? I don't recognize them. I can't see them, but who are they spiritually? Already Chazal and Rashi, with their interpretations, are articulating this idea that the Mi'ele is a spiritual question. But what I'd like to suggest is that the Mi'ele, I'm not the first one to suggest this, but Yaakov is asking, who are they spiritually? I see these two boys immersed in Egyptian culture. And what's Yosef's answer? No, don't worry, Dad. Vayomer Yosef Elaviv Banayim. They are my sons, okay? Just as I was able to maintain my Jewish identity, even here in Egypt, through all of these years, while taking on the trappings of Egyptian culture, a foreign tongue, but just as I was able to preserve my unique identity, so to them, that Hashem gave me through this. So what's this? And interesting. According to Chazal, again, take a look at Rashi here in source number 2. Heralo, Yosef showed him shtar erusin, shtar ketubah. He showed him his his ksuva, right? And then, okay, ubikesh Yosef rachamim al davar, v'nachalav ruach hakodesh. And then the ruach hakodesh rested upon Yaakov, and immediately, as the pasuk says, vayomer kachem na'elai va'avrachem. Okay, son, bring them close to me so that I may bless them. So somehow, by seeing the ksuva, that addressed Yaakov's concerns. What does that mean? Again, I think you can offer the following explanation or interpretation. What is Yosef saying by showing his father the ketubah? How does that resolve his concerns? Don't worry, Dad. Yes, these are Jewish boys, good kosher Jewish boys. Here's our ksuva. We got married. We had chuppah and kiddushin. We had, don't worry about it. We had a rabbi from the Rabbanut Rashit. It was official. We didn't go to Cyprus to get married or anything. So he's telling him that just as I was able to maintain my identity, so to these children. And this of course is centuries and centuries before Chazal would institute the writing of a ketubah to protect the rights of Jewish women. So what is this midrash that Rashi cites? Again, I think it's very simple. I think it's about Jewish identity. That is the message here. Okay? And the question is asked why we bless our sons to be like Menashe and Ephraim. Well, the source is Parashat Vayechi, which we read on Shabbat. But you could ask, why not bless the boys to be like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Not too shabby, the Avot, right? In fact, we bless the girls to be like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. So for the sake of parity, why wouldn't we bless the boys to be like Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov? No, we bless them dafka to be like Menashe and Ephraim. There are different interpretations, but one is, according to Rav Hirsch, because Menashe and Ephraim were able to maintain their Jewish identity. And that is a major theme throughout Sefer Bereishit. And in fact, you see that whenever the children of Yosef are described, whenever Menashe and Ephraim are described in the Torah, they are described as the children who were born to Yosef. Here in source number 3, Uli Yosef yulad shnei bani. They were born to him. Right? B'terem tavo shnat harav asher yalda lo asnat bat Potifera kohen on, but she bore them to him. Asher yalda lo. She bore, not that she gave birth to them, his Egyptian wife, but she bore them to him. And then in source number 4 again, vayivaled li Yosef be'eretz Mitzrayim asher yalda lo asnat bat Potifera kohen on et Menashe et Ephraim. They're born to Yosef, the children who Osnat bat Potifera bore to him. So the text is indicating that they are his sons, cut from the same cloth, if you will. Okay, and just like Yosef was challenged in Eretz Mitzrayim, but yet was strong in his Jewish identity, so too these children. Now, there are many, many examples of this. How Yosef maintains his identity in Eretz Mitzrayim. We know that when he was in the house of Potiphar and he is seduced by Potiphar's wife, and she clutches his garment, that famous story. So according to Chazal, the pasuk suggests it was on that day he went and he did his work. According to Chazal, there was this idolatrous holiday, this pagan holiday, and everyone leaves to go to church or the pagan temple. And Potiphar's wife, Eshet Potiphar, feigns illness. She stays at home. He goes about his work. What does it mean, his work? So there's a machloket in the Gemara, whether it's really his work, avodah mamash. He went and he mopped the floors and he did the windows and he dusted the cabinets and the bookshelves, or maybe that's a euphemism for the fact that he was tempted to be with her. Okay, constant advances he had refused, but maybe finally he was tempted to be with her. And it says, Vayima'en Yosef, he refused her advances, but the word Vayima'en is read to the shalshelet, which only appears 4 times in the Torah. It goes up and down the musical scale and always suggests a wavering. Musically, it suggests a wavering. Shalshelet. How is that, David? I do okay? Yeah. So it always suggests this wavering, going back and forth. maybe to suggest, yes, this was not easy for him to refuse her. He was back and forth. It expresses this inner conflict, and yet he runs away. He is ultimately successful, and according to Chazal, and it's this whole long Gemara, it's a fascinating Gemara, he looks in the window as he's considering being with her, according to the position, according to the opinion that he was tempted to actually be with her and he was going to be with her. He sees the Dmut Diukno Shel Aviv. He sees this image of his father Yaakov. And that is so important because Yaakov himself embodied this trait of maintaining identity. Yaakov, of course, had to live with an Esav, had to live with a Lavan. There's a wonderful perush of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky in his Emet LeYaakov that I'm fond of quoting, where he asks, what's this business of Yeshivat Shem ve'Ever? Right? Even in utero, according to Chazal, Yaakov wants to jump out. He wanted to run out. She feels a commotion. Whenever she passed Yeshivat Shem ve'Ever, he wanted to run out and learn Torah there. Torah says, Vayigdalu ha'ne'arim, the boys grew up, and describes Yaakov as an ish tam yoshevo alim. He sat in tents. What tents? The tents of Shem and Ever. He was in yeshiva. And then at the end of that parasha, Torah, or really Rashi, is trying to account for 14 years that are seemingly missing from Yaakov's life, and says, he spent 14 years studying in yeshiva, and Yeshivat Shem ve'Ever, before he came to the house of Lavan. Okay, why? What's this business of Shem ve'Ever? So Yaakov Kamenetsky explains, what Torah did they teach there? You could ask, what kind of yeshiva was it? Right? Was it a Litvisha yeshiva, a Brisker Derech? Was it a Hesder yeshiva, a religious Zionist yeshiva? Was it like YU, where I studied and David studied? What kind of yeshiva was it? Right? Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asks. So who were Shem and Ever? Shem lived during the Dor HaMabul. He's the son of Noach. Ever lived during the Dor HaPalaga, or the Dor HaFloga, right? The generation that was corrupt and built Migdal Bavel. And the two of them were able to maintain their identity and be strong in who they were amidst a corrupt society. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky explains, Dafka, that's what Yaakov needed to learn. The Torah of Shem ve'Ever is the Torah of maintaining one's identity, because Yaakov had an Esav to live with, and then he had a Lavan to live with. And so that he would emerge finally from the house of Lavan, and he would be able to say, Im Lavan Garti, I've lived with a Lavan. And Chazal notice, Garti, cited by Rashi, Garti, same letters as Taryag. Im Lavan Garti v'Taryag mitzvot shamarti v'lo lamadati mima'asav harayim. I lived with a Lavan, yet I was able to maintain my identity and keep all 613 mitzvot of the Torah and not be influenced by his wicked ways. Okay? So you see that Yaakov maintains his identity, and this is a theme in the life of Yaakov. We'll see a little bit later on this morning if we get to it. There's a lot of materials here on the source sheets this morning. But there's another element as well, and that is Yaakov going into Galut. We have the Parashat HaGalut, where Yaakov goes to Haran. He leaves Eretz Canaan, which Chazal call the Parashat HaGalut. He leaves the land that would become the land of Israel. He leaves Eretz Canaan to go to Haran to live with Lavan. And there's this whole other theme of maintaining one's identity in the Galut, in the exile, in the diaspora outside the land of Israel. And that's also an important theme in the lives of Yaakov, Yosef, as we'll see, and ultimately the Jewish people. So, and then we'll see also Yaakov then has to maintain his identity and is concerned about the Jewish identity of his family in Egypt as well. Okay. So here Yosef is about to sin, and he sees this Dmut Diukno Shel Aviv, his father, which of course represents to him being strong in one's identity. And his father tells him, this is not in Rashi's comments, but this is the Gemara, which Rashi draws from. In the passage, the longer passage in the Gemara, it's this whole long story. Yaakov tells him, your name is ultimately going to be inscribed together with your brothers on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. You want to give all that up, right? For a few minutes of pleasure with Eshet Potiphar. You want to lose all that. So the image of his father represents this theme of identity and maintaining identity, preserving identity, which is so important in the life of Yaakov and Yosef. And so that's why it's Dafka his father who he sees. And as I said, we'll return to this. We'll see at the end a very powerful passage from the Meshech Chochmah. But Yaakov is also concerned before going down to Egypt. Now, before we get to the next source, one of the ways, or the way, really, Yosef proves to his father that he's still alive is through those agalot that he sends, right? The Torah says that Yaakov had a hard time believing that Yosef was still alive. He'd been mourning for him all of these years, and the brothers come and say that he's alive. And he doesn't believe the brothers at first until he sees the wagons, the agalot, that Yosef sends. And then all of a sudden, okay, now he believes it to be true. Now his spirit is revived in him. He knows that Yosef is alive and that the story that the brothers are telling is true. Well, if they could have lied to him at the outset, in the first place, telling their father that Yosef was killed, torn by a beast, who knows if they're telling the truth this time? But on a simple pshat level, he sees all the riches, all the wealth, all the agalot coming, and then he understands that Yosef is alive, and he's become a moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. He's Mishneh Lamelech. But according to Chazal, as cited by Rashi, he sees the agalot, which alludes to the last thing that they learned together, Perek Egla Arufa. Right? They were learning Gemara. Again, this is before Matan Torah, so you can ask, what does this mean? What are Chazal trying to teach with this midrash? There's another version of the midrash that the agalot were a reference to the agalot from the Mishkan, okay, part of the gifts of the Nisiyim, the Mishkan, the agalot, the mechitzot, Rishut HaYachid, all different types of imagery in the midrash, but ultimately with these midrashim, Chazal are telling us that he sent a message to his father, I'm still a Jew. I remember the last thing that we learned together, Perek Egla Arufa. You could ask, Perek Egla, they're learning Gemara. This is before Matan Torah, and they're learning Gemara. But again, it's about Jewish identity. It's all about identity. And so then when Yaakov is going to go with his family down to Egypt, he's also concerned, how are we going to preserve our identity there in Egypt? And take a look at source number 5. Vet Yudah shalach lefanav el Yosef lahorot lefanav Goshna vayavo arza Goshen. So he sends Yehuda in advance to Yosef lahorot. What does lahorot mean? He sends him first to Egypt before the family goes down. Lahorot, maybe to arrange for things, to get things in order. But lahorot could also mean to teach or to instruct. And according to Chazal, he sends him down there to set up a yeshiva, to set up a Beit Midrash. That yes, even in Galut, even in Mitzrayim, even in a foreign land, we're going to preserve our identity. We're going to be protected in the cloister of the Beit Midrash of the yeshiva. That's what Chazal are trying to tell us. Again, it's about identity. Right? You can ask, what are they teaching in this yeshiva that Yehuda's going to set up? Okay, it's a very powerful idea. And Goshen, of course, was a place for the Jewish people to be able to maintain their unique identity. On a simple pshat level, Yosef says, we're going to put you in Goshen because you guys are meat eaters. You eat lamb, and the lamb is the Egyptian god, so it won't work. It's not going to work for you to be integrated. But of course, the deeper meaning is that you're going to have this place, this unique place, to be able to maintain your unique identity. Okay. And, it's interesting. We always read the story of Yosef on Hanukkah. And in many ways, the very challenges that Yosef faces in eretz Mitzrayim, the preservation of Jewish identity, are the very same challenges that the Hashmonaim faced, the Jews faced during the Second Temple period, and what the Hashmonaim were fighting for. Okay. We'll maybe come back to this a little bit later on this morning, but the battle of the Hanukkah story and the message of the Hanukkah story is really about preserving Jewish identity, okay, maintaining Jewish identity amidst the foreign culture, preserving light. Hanukkah is all about the light, preserving the light of our Torah, illuminating amidst a foreign culture whose values are different than ours. And I once heard a beautiful idea that the letters on the Sivivon, or the dreidel, outside the land of Israel are what? Nez Gadol Hayasham. So Nun, Gimel, Hey, Shin. Those four letters spell what? Goshna. 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 In Chutz La'aretz, right? Nez Gadol Hayasham, Nun Gimel Shin Hey spells Goshna, or Nun Gimel Hey Shin, spells Goshna, that place that is there to, in the diaspora, in Chutz La'aretz, in the Galut, in the exiles, to tell you, you got to hold on to your identity. You got to make a wall around yourself to a certain degree. Yes, of course, we learn from the general culture, and there's a lot of good there too. But we also have to maintain our identity. We cannot give in to the forces of assimilation, okay? So it's so telling that in Chutz La'aretz they spin a dreidel that spells out Goshna, Dafka, that place that was set aside by Yosef for the Jewish people to be able to preserve their unique identity. Okay? Here in Israel, our dreidels are different, right? We are, so to speak, protected geographically even. We are in this land, and that's why it's so important that we have this land. I mean, this whole debate, what is Judaism? Is it a religion? Are we a nation? Are we a people? What are we? What is Judaism? And why do we need a land? Right? We're going to come back to this theme a little bit later on this morning. Why do we need borders? Why do we need a land? The idea is to be able to preserve our identity and not be influenced by foreign influences. Again, of course, there's good, and we have spoken about that in the past. We've spoken about secular education and learning from the general society. Yesh chachma bagoyim ta'amin. Not too long ago, we saw that midrash. But we'll come back to the Hanukkah story. But certainly these are major themes in Sefer Bereishit, and especially at the end of Sefer Bereishit, as the Jewish people prepare to go into Galut Mitzrayim, to enter Egypt, this foreign land with its foreign influences. And so take a look at source number 6. This is the very beginning of Sefer Shemot, right? Ve'elu Shemot b'nei Yisrael habayim Mitzrayim et Yaakov ish uveito bao, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc., etc., etc. These are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Egypt. And it names the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Yaakov. And take a look at Pasuk Vav, Vayamat Yosef, V'kol echav v'chol adorahu. Yosef and that whole generation died out. And then Pasuk Zayin, Uvnei Yisrael paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu v'ya'atzmu b'ma'od ma'od v'timilei ha'aretz otam v'kam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. Okay, so a few things here. We begin Sefer Shemot with the sons of Yaakov that go down to Mitzrayim. And then the Torah says that they died. But we already knew that from the end of Sefer Bereishit. Why does the Torah have to begin Sefer Shemot with the names of the children of Yaakov? Why begin with names? We already knew their names. We already knew they went down to Egypt. And we already knew that this generation died. Why not begin Sefer Shemot? It's a new Sefer. Begin it. It's a new chapter. It's a new page. It's a new book. Begin it fresh. Start with the experience of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, the next generation. Why does the Torah have to name them once again? And then we go from named individuals to a people that are nameless, that are anonymous, that are proliferating and having lots of babies and teeming and swarming, but we don't know their names. The book is called Names, but we don't have any new names. The only names we have are the old names from the previous book. And in fact, I didn't put it on the sheets here, but when the Torah relates the birth of Moshe, how is that introduced? We have a man from the tribe of Levi. A man marries a woman, Ish, Maz and Isha, and they have a baby, and the first new name of the book of Shemot is Moshe. So for a book that's called Names, Shemot, at the beginning, there are no new names, old names, the children of Yaakov. And why are they named? We don't need to name them. We already finished their story at the end of Sefer Bereishit. Why are they mentioned? And why is there this sort of absence of names, the next generation, the Jewish people are not named. They're this swarming, teeming people, and even the parents of Moshe are not named. Right? Moshe is the first new name in this Sefer. Very interesting. So first, we'll take a look at this idea of the proliferation or the poriut, the fertility. That's what I was looking for. The poriut. Sometimes you've been living here long enough, you start forgetting your English. You still don't know Hebrew, but you start forgetting your English, and then you make no sense whatsoever. So, according to Rashi, and at least some of the Midrashim, it would seem this is a very positive thing. They are having a lot of children, right? Ubnei Yisrael paru vayishitzu vayirbu vayatzmu b'ma'od ma'od. They are teeming. They are swarming. Vayishitzu, swarming like insects, like shratzim, like rodents. We'll come back to that in a moment. But Rashi here in source number 7 quotes the famous Midrash, Shahayu yoldot shisha bekeres echad. 6 children in one womb. Sextuplets. Wow. Suggesting this blessing of fertility. Okay. And this is based on a Midrash here in source number 8, Shemot Rabbah. Davar acher kol achad v'achad yoldot shisha bekeres echad. Right? Because the Torah uses these many words to describe all this extra verbiage, right? Paru, vayishitzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu, b'ma'od, me'od. Right? So that's 6 words to describe how fertile they were. So that implies shisha bekeres echad. Davar acher, there's another opinion, kol achat yoldot yud bet, 12 children at once. Wow, incredible. Because each of those words represents 2 children. Davar acher, vayatzmu. What is vayatzmu? Harei samech. What does that mean? Not 6, not 12, but 6D. Samech. 6D children at once. Because the Torah describes them as swarming and teeming like insects. And the Midrash continues this, don't be surprised, don't be so surprised. Shaharei akrav shu katan min hashratzim yoledet shishim. Now I didn't check to see if this is factual, but we know that many insects and certainly fish and things have many children at once. They lay eggs, they have many children at once. Don't be surprised, the Midrash says, because a scorpion, which is the smallest of the shratzim, can have 60 children at once, can lay eggs and have 60 children at once. I don't know. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. But in any case, so there is this comparison already with these creepy crawlers. We'll come back to that. But according to Rashi, this is beautiful. This is fertility. This is a blessing. And Rashi's not bothered by the word vayishutsu, where they're being compared to shratzim, insects, creepy crawlers, right? Rodents. And if you take a look at Parshat Noach, where after the flood, Hashem blesses Noach and commands humanity again, pru ruvu milu et eretz, be fruitful, multiply, fill the land. And in Pasuk Zayin there, va'atem pru ruvu, shirtzu va'aretz, urevuva. The Torah uses the lashon sheretz, right? In reference to humans. Okay? And in fact, maybe if you turn the page, top of the next page, maybe this is a fulfillment of what Hashem tells Yaakov, that, right, you're going to go down to Egypt. Don't be afraid. We're going to come back to this source at the end. Don't be afraid. Fear not for going down to Egypt. Ki l'goy gadol asimcha sham. It's Bereishit Perek Mem Vav Pasuk Gimel. I'm going to make you a great nation there. Okay, so it could be that it's a fulfillment of this promise to Yaakov Avinu. But there's another way of looking at all of this. Not that it's this beautiful blessing of fertility and a fulfillment of the promise that Hashem made to Yaakov, but no. By suggesting that they were like shratzim, swarming, teeming, like insects, there is some criticism there. And by the fact that we begin with names, the names of the children of Yaakov, and then we get to this generation that is without names, that maybe has lost their unique names. Our names, of course, are our identity, right? They've lost their names, they've lost their Jewish identity, and they've assimilated into Egyptian culture, and maybe they're acting like Shratzim. And that's the Sforno's reading of these psukim at the very beginning of Sefer Shemot. And take a look at source number 11. This is an incredible way of looking at Sefer Shemot. And the first time, years ago, I saw this was eye-opening. I had never considered this before. But the Sforno contrasts the way the Torah begins with the names of the children of Yaakov to now Pasuk Zayin, where we have this people that's swarming and teeming and doesn't have any names. And then all of a sudden, Pasuk Chet, Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yadat Yosef. All of a sudden, a new king. Now, Chazal debate either a new king or the same old king with new policies, a final solution. He's forgotten about Yosef, right? Either a new king who never knew Yosef or the same king who forgot about Yosef. And the Sforno sees this as a progression. You start with people who maintain their identity, the older generation. Then they come to a new place and their children begin to assimilate and lose their identity. And then all of a sudden, persecution. This is something unfortunate we've seen throughout Jewish history. But this is what the Sforno writes. This is an incredible interpretation. Ve'elu Shemot. Elu haniskarim bekan hayu ru'uyim lahoda b'shem ki kol echad mehem ra'ui liot nechshav ish al shmo hamora al tzurato ha'ishiyit. Right? As we asked, why does the Torah mention the names of the sons of Yaakov? They don't belong here at the beginning of Sefer Shemot. They already died in Sefer Bereishit. Why does the Torah have to reiterate it? Why does the Torah repeat it? But there is a reason. For the Sforno, it's to create a contrast between them and this new generation. They are fitting, he writes, to be named because they maintained their identity. And all their days they were filled with light. They were illuminating. They did not go to Tarbut Ra. They did not assimilate. They did not adopt this foreign culture. However, after their death, their children, however, the next generation after their death, they were not so important, so special in the eyes of God and man because they assimilated, as we'll see. Why does the Torah mention again that those 70 souls that went down to Egypt, that generation, to suggest that they preserved their identity their entire lives? However, Paruva Yishutsu, then the subsequent generation, they became fertile and proliferated and propagated, but teemed and swarmed like insects, like vermin, like creepy crawlers, right? Like shratzim. After the death of that generation, all 70 souls who went down to Egypt, now they went in the ways, they turned to the ways of shratzim. He takes it literally. It's not a blessing, saying, wow, look how fertile they are. No. They're disgusting. They've adopted this disgusting culture that is Egyptian culture. And then he has this play on words, the Sforno, and it's incredible. Sheratzim leve'er shachat. Right? Shratzim, these creepy crawlers, it's related to the word sheratzim, who run to the pit, leber shachat, to the empty pit. Uvachein, and therefore, what does the next pasuk say? Vayakam melech chadash, a new king over Egypt, or the same old king with new policies against the Jews. They're punished for assimilating. And again, we've seen this throughout Jewish history. We become comfortable. The next generation assimilates. And then, unfortunately, oftentimes, Vayakam melech chadash, there are policies against the Jews to remind them who they are. If you want to shake off your Jewishness, if you want to immerse yourselves into the general culture and forget about your Jewish identity, well, we're going to remind you who you are. There's going to be anti-Semitism. There's going to be a gzeirah. There's going to be gzeirat shmad. We mentioned the story of Hanukkah. Right? So, yeah, the Jews Hellenized, but then all of a sudden there were all sorts of gzeirot made against the Jews who refused to Hellenize. And this happens, again, throughout Jewish history at different periods. I need not mention, but oftentimes when we forget who we are, Hashem sends an oyev, an enemy, to remind us who we are. And we see this many throughout. You see this in Sefer Shoftim, you see this throughout Tanakh, you see this throughout Jewish history, and of course in modern Jewish history. I need not elaborate, time does not allow. But the Sforno, and this is so incredible, provides a new reading of the Sefer, of the beginning of Sefer Shemot, the end of Sefer Bereishit into Sefer Shemot, and explains why all of a sudden we name the children of Yaakov who already died at the end of Sefer Bereishit. It's unnecessary to name them. No, but it's to create a contrast between these named individuals who preserved their identity and that generation versus the new generation who've lost their identity, who've assimilated into Egyptian culture. And you find other themes of this. We'll take a look together here at sources 12, 13, 14, 15. When Hashem chooses Moshe for the task of redeeming the Jewish people, at first Moshe demurs. Why? Well, maybe because he's not a man of words, right? He's an arel sfatayim, kvad peh, kvad lashon, doesn't speak so well. So maybe he sees in himself something lacking, and he goes back and forth. Days go by, he goes back and forth in conversation with Hashem. But maybe it's not so much that he sees in himself something lacking, but he sees in the Jewish people something lacking. He sees a nation that has assimilated, and maybe, just maybe, he questions whether they are redeemable. He questions their redeemability. And we know that he goes down, Vayar b'sivlotam, he goes down to see them, to feel their pain, to see their situation. His heart goes out to them, and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew, and he kills the Egyptian, and he buries him. And then here's source number 2, Shemot Perek Bet, Pasuk Yud Gimel, Yud Daled. Vayetze b'yom hashini, he goes out on the second day, and he sees Anashim Ivrim Nitzim Vayomer L'Rasha Lama Takeh Re'echa. He sees 2 Jewish men this time fighting, and he gets involved. Moshe, the future leader of the Jewish people, gets involved. The Torah gives these 3 episodes where you see that he gets involved in the matters. He stands up, he takes a stand, he's being prepared for leadership before Hashem comes to him. And he says, why are you hitting your brother? And they ask him, or say to him, they retort, Vayomer mi. Who do you think you are? Who placed you a leader above us? Right? Or what? Are you going to kill us the same way you killed the Egyptian? Uh-oh. Vayira Moshe. And Moshe is afraid. Vayomar achenu davar. And he says to himself, the matter is known. The matter is known. So the simple pshat, as Rashi says, he's afraid because, keep shuto. He's afraid because the word is out. He's going to get in trouble for killing the Egyptian. He's going to have to flee to Midian. But then there's another interpretation. Umidrasho de aglo al sharabi Yisrael rishayim diliturim. He sees wicked people among the Jewish people that are informers. Amar, and he says, Me'ata shema enam ru'yin lihigael. Maybe these people are not worthy of being redeemed at all. Okay. And then he says, the matter is known. What does that mean? So Rashi says, Kimashmo. Yeah, simple interpretation. The matter is known. The word is out. But no, there's another interpretation. Umidrasho nodali hadavar shahayiti tameh alav. Now I understand. Achin nodah hadavar. The matter is known. Rashi offers a second interpretation. It's known now. I understand what I had been struggling with all along. Ma chatu Yisrael mikol shiv'im umot liot nirdim ba'avodat parech. What did Israel do? How did they sin to the point where they're being persecuted with this back-breaking labor, this avodat parech? Aval ro'ani shehem ruim l'kach. Now I understand. Yes, indeed, they are. It is fitting. They are getting what they deserve. This is incredible. And again, Hashem and Moshe have this back and forth where Moshe doesn't want to accept the mantle of leadership. So we were always taught in school that's because he didn't have enough self-confidence. Maybe he's kvad peh, kvad lashon. He's arel svatayim. He's not a man of words. He's not a good speaker. He lacks that confidence in himself. But here in source number 4 in Perek Dalid, Vayan Moshe vayomer vehein lo yaminu li v'lo yishmu v'koli ki yomru lo nir'a elecha Hashem. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to believe in me. Okay? And Hashem, of course, gives him a sign, or a few signs, as we'll see in a moment. And we know that when he finally comes to the Jewish people, they did not listen to him. They could not hear his promise of redemption from the avodah kasha, from the kotzer ruach, that shortness of breath. They were being suffocated not only physically but spiritually in eretz Mitzrayim. Okay, and Hashem says to him, I'm going to give you some signs. Excuse me. Here, I'll give you some signs to prove to the Jewish people that this is from God. And Vayomer elav Hashem, Mazeh v'yadecha, Vayomer mateh. He asks, what's in your hand? He says, well, it's my staff. But interesting, the word mazeh in the Torah is written as one word, or the two words mazeh, what is in your hand, are written as one word, mazeh, which can be understood to mean mizeh, from this or with this. And ultimately, Hashem says, okay, you're going to take that staff and you're going to turn into a snake, right? Well, what's that about? Why dafka snake? There's a lot of staffs turning into snakes at the beginning of Sefer Shemot, right? But why is that a sign? Is it really for Bnei Israel, or is that a sign from Moshe? Is that a message to Moshe about a snake? We'll see in a moment. And the other sign is what? What does Hashem do with Moshe? He tells him to take your hand and what? And put it inside your bosom. And what will happen? Right? Havena yadcha bechekecha. And he took it out, and it was sarat. It was leprous. It was like snow. V'inei yado mitzorat kashelik in pasuk vav. Okay, so those are the signs. What is with this tzarat? Right, tzarat is something that we'll see later on. Miriam gets tzarat for speaking lashon hara. Tzarat is associated with lashon hara. So what are these signs about? A snake, leprosy, kind of strange. Hashem could have given any old sign. So take a look at source number 15. Rashi explains, first of all, this staff in your hand that he's going to turn into a snake. As I said, it's written, Rashi says, L'kach nichtav teva achad. It's written like one word in the Torah. Mazeh, what is this in your hand? Mazeh v'yadecha. It can be read mizeh. Lidrosh mizeh shebiyadcha ata chayav l'lakot. Shechashad b'ksherim. Hashem is responding to Moshe's concerns. They're not going to listen to me, he says. Vayan Moshe vayomer vehein lo yaminu li. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to hear me. Moshe doubts them. So Hashem says, mizeh, with this very stick, right? That word mazeh, those two words mazeh can be read as one word. Mizeh, it's written in the Torah, one word, mizeh. With this very stick, you should be hit. You should be punished for being choshi b'ksherim, for doubting the Jewish people. Okay? For doubting their redeemability. And then Rashi on Pasuk Gimel explains that the snake was a remez lo siper lashon hara al Yisrael. Okay? Vatafas omanuto shel nachash. He spoke lashon hara, and he has grabbed onto the art of the snake. That's the crafty snake from Gan Eden. And then Rashi explains why is his hand turned into leprosy, or why does he get leprosy on his hand? It becomes white like a leper, white like a leper, it becomes leprous, like snow, white like snow. What's that about? Again, Lashon Hara, right? Because he said that they are not going to believe me, and they're not going to listen. So he was punished with tzarat, which is associated with Lashon Hara, just like his daughter, his sister. I'm trying to move fast. We're almost out of time. His sister Miriam was punished with tzarat for Lashon Hara. Okay, so Moshe, we see, doubts them, and here Chazal are saying, and Hashem is responding to that. Don't be so quick to doubt them. Maybe there is something in them that is redeemable. Maybe there indeed is a redeemable quality. You see a nation that is swarming, teeming, that it has assimilated, that has lost their identity, that's willing to rat you out to the Egyptian authorities. These Rishayim. No, there is something redeemable here, Hashem tells Moshe. But we know that in the land of Egypt, the Jewish people had sunk to the 49th level of Tumah. Here in source number 16 from the Zohar Chadash, part of the Zoharic literature, describes that the Jewish people had sunk to the 49th level of Tumah, of spiritual impurity. Had they reached the 50th level, they would never be able to be redeemed. It would be a lost cause. Okay, but they had sunk down, and Egypt, of course, represents a corrupt society, but not just a corrupt society, a promiscuous society, an immoral society, a licentious society. We're told in Parshat Acharei Mot, Vayikra Perek Yudchet, here in source number 17 at the bottom of the page, Ki ma'aseh eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshaftem ba lo ta'asu. We're not allowed to act in the ways of the Egyptians among whom we lived. Okay? The Egyptians were an immoral people, a disgusting people, and that isur is associated with certain immoral acts. Okay, certain arayot, imitating the ways of the Egyptians. Okay, and here, source number 18, where I've underlined, this is a midrash in Shemot Rabbah. Kishemet Yosef hefiru brit milah, amru niyeh kimitzrim. When Yosef died, they stopped circumcising themselves. They said, let us be like Egyptians, not unlike the Jews during the Second Temple period, those Hellenized Jews who stopped circumcising themselves and pretended they weren't circumcised in order to fit in with the Greeks. Okay, Mikanata lamed shemoshe malan b'yetziat Mitzrayim. So here, Moshe had to circumcise them before they left Egypt. Not before they left Egypt, before they could eat from the Korban Pesach, because an uncircumcised individual is not allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach. And we have this imagery of the Dam Mila and the Dam Korban Pesach. So you see that they had assimilated in Egypt and sunk down to the 49th level of Tum'ah. And the Brit Milah, of course, is a sign. It's an oath between us and God. It's a symbol on our flesh that we are Jews. It's about Jewish identity, but it's also about purity. It's also about sexual purity. And you see that in Egypt, they wanted to be just like the Egyptians. Okay. Again, not unlike the story of Hanukkah, which is all about the threat of spiritual extinction. Okay. Hanukkah, as we've explained before, is the victory over spiritual extinction. It was a spiritual threat. And yet, there's something redeemable. There is a redeemable quality about the Jewish people. What is that? So, the Midrashim here in sources 19 and 20 describe that the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt, not only because of the Nashim Tzidkaniot, the righteous women, but also because they maintained their identity. So they were punished, according to Sforno's reading of the beginning of Sefer Shemot, because they had assimilated and lost their identity. They wanted to be like the Egyptians. They gave up Brit Milah, as we just read. And what redeems them? Those who had clung to their identity in Egypt. B'schut kama dvarim, where I've underlined source number 19. This is Bamidbar Rabbah on Parshat Balak. B'schut kama dvarim nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim. In the merit of a number of things, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. Shenu rabbeinu b'schut Dalit Varim, 4 things. Nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim. They were redeemed from Egypt. Shelo shinu et shmotan. They didn't change their names. They didn't change their language. Shelo shinu et lishonam. They continued to speak their language. Velo gilu mistorin shelahem. They did not give up their unique identity, their mystery, whatever that means. Velo nifritzu ba'arayot. They did not become, or they did not get involved, they did not make a breach and get involved in sexual immorality, which Egypt was famous for, as we just explained. Okay? And then here in source number 20, Shegadru Yisrael v'Mitzrayim atzman min ha'erva, nigalu Mitzrayim. So they placed a fence around themselves, again, from erva, from arayot, where I've underlined, Rav Huna Amar B'Shem Bar Kapara B'Shil Dalit Dvarim Nigalu Yisrael Mitzrayim Shelo Shinu Et Shmam V'et Lashonam V'lo Amru Lashon Hara. Here, not only did they preserve their names and their language, but they didn't speak Lashon Hara. V'lo nimtza beinehen echad mehen parutz be'erva. Not even one of them. So that is difficult with what we just read, and with what we understood. But what the Midrash here suggests is that for all those who did assimilate in Egypt and did lose their unique identity, there were those who maintained their identity and did not assimilate and did not give in to the mores of this immoral society there in Egypt. And it's interesting that the first mitzvah that is given to the Jewish people in eretz Mitzrayim is what? The first mitzvah given to the Jewish people as a nation while still in Egypt is the mitzvah of what? Rosh Chodesh. HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim Rishon hu lechodshei Hashana. Why dafka that mitzvah? Why not, I don't know, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? Why not the mitzvah of Shabbat? Give them something. Why Rosh Chodesh? It's unifying. I think that's absolutely correct. But how is it unifying? How is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh unifying? Any suggestions? Don't all answer at once. It's unifying because it makes us the masters of our own time and our own destiny. It allows us, what is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh? We proclaim the new month. We determine when the Jewish holidays fall out. We are in charge of our calendar, right? So it makes us the masters of our own time and our own destiny. And so while still in Egypt, Hashem gave us dafka this mitzvah to say, yeah, you are no longer slaves to Paro. You are your own masters now. You are masters over your time, your destiny. It's about giving them back their unique identity, okay? And maybe it's about removing the Egypt from them, because as has been said by many, it's much easier to take the Jew out of Egypt than to take the Egypt out of the Jew. We have many examples of this where Jewish people in the Midbar are still continuing with this kind of slave mentality. They're complaining about what they had in Egypt. They're still thinking like slaves. Not so easy to take the Egypt out of the Jew, but that's this mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. Interestingly, we mentioned the story of Hanukkah and the challenges that the Jews faced during the Second Temple period with Hellenism, with the Greeks, that which the Hashmonaim fought against. What was at least one of the mitzvot that the Greeks decreed against, prohibited the Jews from observing? Proclaiming the Rosh Chodesh. Again, the Rosh Chodesh is about our identity. It makes us into our own master. It's about throwing off that yoke of the Pharaoh, of servitude. Okay? And ultimately, what creates this turnaround, and we'll end with this idea, is them crying out to Hashem. Here in source number 21. Vahi vayamim harabim hahem vayamat melech Mitzrayim. They cried out from the avodah, from the work. Vayizaku. They cried out. Vatal shavatam el haelokim min havodah. They cried out to Hashem, and vayishma elokim et nakatam, vayizkor elokim et brito, et Avraham, et Yitzchak, et Yaakov. Hashem heard their cry. He remembered the covenant he made with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Vayar elokim et bnei Yisrael, vayada elokim. He saw the Jewish people, and he knew, he understood. So what does that mean? It's the Ramban there, here in source number 22. Writes, Ki afal pi she'nishlam hazman she'nigzar alehem lo hayu ru'uyim lihigael, as we explained before, even though the time had come to an end, they were still not fitting to be redeemed. They were still unworthy of being redeemed. Why were they unworthy of being redeemed? As we saw this morning, because they had assimilated, they had lost their unique identity, which Yaakov and Yosef had tried so very hard to preserve even while in Eretz Mitzrayim. Moshe Mefurash al Yidei Yechezkel Perek Chaf describes how, here in source number 23, we don't have time, but for homework, you'll take a look at these psukim from Yechezkel. Yechezkel is describing how the Jewish people throughout history have rebelled against God, and how even in Eretz Mitzrayim, Hashem warns them not to become impure while in Egypt, and they do just that, as we saw this morning. They lost their identity. They are influenced by Egyptian culture, by the sexual mores in Egypt, by the corruption in Egypt. They had lost their unique identity, what made them so special. And the time had already elapsed, the Ramban says, and they were not redeemed. But what sets the wheels of redemption in motion? Ela mipnei hatzaka, the Ramban continues, because of this cry. Mipnei hatzaka kibel tfilatam berachamav. Hashem accepted their prayer with mercy, with abundant mercy. That is what sets the wheels of Geula in motion, crying out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's more than just crying out to him in prayer. It's ultimately making a renewed commitment to their identity. It's, of course, about tshuva. An important part of tshuva, as we know, is crying out to Hashem, praying to Hashem. Za'akat, that's Rambam emphasizes this in his Hilchot Tshuva. That's an important element of the steps of Tshuva. So it's not only that they just davened to Hashem, but they made a renewed commitment to their faith, to their tradition. And this message is so important, this idea of preserving Jewish identity outside the land of Israel, where it's not easy, where it is challenging. We've seen that throughout Jewish history. We'll end just very quickly with this passage from the Meshech Chochmah, Mayor Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk. It's a wonderful passage. He notes that Hashem speaks to Yaakov when it's dafka at night. Vayomer Elokim l'Yisrael b'marot halayla. Vayomer Yaakov. The psukim that we saw earlier, where before Yaakov descends with his family to Egypt, Hashem speaks to him and says, "Don't worry, I'm going to descend together with you to Egypt, and ultimately I'm going to bring you up out of Egypt." But the Meshech Chochmah notes that he speaks to Yaakov dafka at night. It's b'marot laila. And why is that? He says, it's interesting. We find that Hashem speaks to Yaakov dafka at night. He speaks to him at the beginning of Parshat Vayetze in a dream, that famous dream where he sees the angels ascending and descending. He comes to him dafka at night. He says, you don't find that by Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but it's dafka before. You don't find that by Avram Yitzchak. You dafka find that by Yaakov. He speaks to him dafka b'marot laila, in a vision of night. It says the night, of course, represents the darkness of galut, of exile. And Hashem comes to him before he goes into exile the first time, before he goes to Lavan's home in Haran. He comes to him at night to allude to the exile. And here, before he descends to Egypt, he comes to him at night to suggest the long, dark exile and says, don't worry, I'm going to be with you even at night. And for the Meshech Chochmah, that's significant. It represents this long exile and how the Shekhinah is still with the Jewish people even while in exile. He writes, Lachen ba elav hidgalut elokit balayla. Therefore, this revelation of God comes to Yaakov dafka night, larot she'af balayla, even at night, bechashchat galut, in the darkness of exile, shorash Shekhinah b'Yisrael. The Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on Israel. As the Gemara says in Megillah, when they left for Bavel, when they were exiled to Bavel, the Shekhinah was among them. And he says, he gives other examples of how, yes, the Shekhinah is with us in the exile. But he continues and writes, but that's only if we maintain our identity, if we maintain our connection to the Torah of Israel and the land of Israel. From this emerges a very important idea, Musar Haskel. When the Jewish people cling to the appropriate tradition, as HaYisraeli hu goy etanatik yomin, asher niglu elav ha'elokim b'yot hamikdash al mechono. When they cling to their tradition, yes, the divine presence is with them, even in this long night that's called exile. When they forget the covenant of their forefathers, but when they forget the ways of their fathers, when they don't walk in their ways, when they lose their identity, when they lose what makes them so special, what makes them so unique, their Jewish identity, when they assimilate, then the Shekhinah is removed from them. And that's such an important message. The Meshech Chochmah of Meir Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk, who died in 1926, a major supporter of the land of Israel, of the Yishuv, the nascent Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael. He wrote letters supporting the Yishuv. He saw in the Balfour Declaration and in the San Remo Conference really a spark of the beginning of the redemptive process, the Atchalta de Geulah, he writes. And this idea that he expresses here, of course, is a major theme in the thought of Rav Kook as well. This idea that the sustaining strength of the Jewish people in the diaspora is their connection to the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, the Torah of Yisrael, the land of Israel. Ultimately, that is the challenge that we face today in the diaspora as well. It's a challenge that we faced since the days of Yaakov and Yosef and their children and the Bnei Yisrael and Eretz Mitzrayim we saw together this morning. But these are the very challenges that we face today as well, here in Israel and, of course, in the diaspora. I think it's incumbent upon us to strengthen that connection with diaspora Jewry. Unfortunately, in recent months and years, we've seen how their connection to the land of Israel and the state of Israel has dwindled, how, unfortunately, the conservative and reform movements, they've been very critical of Israel's response to attacks from Gaza, and that strong connection that once was has seemed to weaken and diminish. But ultimately, what the Meshech Chochmah is saying here, and what Rav Kook writes in many places, is that the sustaining strength of the Jewish people outside the land of Israel, in the Galut, as we've seen throughout Jewish history, is ultimately their connection to the Torah of Israel, the land of Israel, a connection to their Jewish identity. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you all next week.